Go. Today we are going to do the legislative branch. All right. I am using the Constitution packet, so hopefully you have access to this. I'm also using the branches of government cheat sheet, so hopefully you have access to that. Okay. Page 1 of the packet is going to simply be the checks and balances sheet. All right. As we go to page 3 of it, we have the federal system. We talked about this a little bit in class, but this is the, what's that? This is sort of the lead up to the legislative branch.
So this is before the wait, where's
Yes.
the packet?
It's on Moodle, right? It's what you read before you got here today to be prepared for it, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Obviously, right? So, the federal system, all right? This is the concept of state plus national government working together. All right? They each work together to form a federalist system or federalism. When we talked about this in class today, who has the power if you go head to head with federal versus state governments? Who has the most power? Federal government. Good. All right. We have separation of powers, checks and balances. So each of these branches of government have certain jobs. They each have certain roles that they have, and it's designed to make sure that one of the three branches does not have too much power. You'll see that on page 4 of the Constitution. All right? So, when we get to the Constitution itself, it begins with the preamble of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States. What the preamble is, it's basically the mission statement of the Constitution. It is designed to be sort of the really broad, overarching goals that we have as a Constitution. It is not giving specific laws or specific rules. It doesn't set anything up. It's designed to do these sort of big picture things. All right? So, the legislative branch. The job of the legislative branch is to do what?
Make laws.
Make laws. Good. We try not to use the word in the definition if we have that, right? But you're correct in that. All right, so it is designed to make laws. It is made up of two bodies. The first body is the House of Representatives. Okay? House of Representatives is the lower house. All right? There are 435 members. They are elected every 2 years. And every 2 years, all of them are up for re-election. All right? So it's a 2-year term, unlimited term limits. You can serve as many times as you get elected, but you are elected every 2 years. You must be 25 years old. You must be a citizen for 7 years. Okay? And you must live in the state you represent. We sometimes see issues where you will have somebody who is running for, say, the congressional seat in Duluth and they live in Minneapolis. You can do that, but if I'm a citizen of Duluth, I'm going to want somebody that is living in my city or at least in my district in order to do that. Yeah,
So is it a citizen of the state for 7 years?
of the United States.
Oh,
So there are no state citizenship that we have. You don't become a
Okay.
citizen of a state.
well, yeah.
You'd be a citizen of the United States. But you can in theory move to that state just to run in the election. And we've seen that done before. Hillary Clinton, for example, when she became senator from New York, moved from D.C. to New York in order to run for the Senate there, as she got that. Okay? The head of the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House right now is who? Paul Ryan from Wisconsin. That is an elected position. All right. The number of electives is based on the population of a state. So the breakdown, the more states, the more people you have in your state, the more representatives you have in the House. That number changes every 10 years with our census. So we have a census every decade at the 0, so 10, 20, 30. If the population of Minnesota was to increase by 1 million people, we would gain members of the House, and another state would lose members of the House. So it's a proportional thing. Okay? If a member of the House resigns or dies, there is a special election to re-elect that person. The idea of the House is that they are the most closely connected to the people. It's the smallest of the federal government to represent a group of people. So therefore, it is the most directly related to us. That's why we elect them every 2 years. Okay, question about that? The Senate. The Senate has 100 members. How many per state? 2. Good math. All right. In order to be a senator or parts of the Senate, you have a 6-year term. 1/3 of the Senate is elected every 2 years. So a third in 18, a third in 20, and a third in 22. That'll be how it goes. Every 2 years. So while every member of the House is up for election every 2 years, it's just a third of the Senate. So that's why, as of right now, there is an expectation it will be challenging for the Democrats to take back the Senate based on who is up for re-election in 2018. There's stronger Republican Senate seats that are up right now. In Minnesota, it is going to be Franken that is up in 2018, I believe. I believe he's the next senator that's up. Don't quote me on that. You must be at least 30 years old. You must have been a citizen for 9 years. You must live in the state that you are representing. The president of the Senate is the vice president of the United States. He only gets to vote if there is a tie in the Senate. This has happened a couple times this year, where Mike Pence has had to cast a vote in the Senate. So if, in theory, you have 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats, the vice president's going to be voting a lot. If you have 58 Republicans and 42 Democrats, the vice president's probably not going to vote all that much. All right, so he will just break the tie. Okay. Okay, so jobs of each branch. Okay, for the House. And then the Senate, and then both. So the House, okay? The House can propose tax laws. So if we're going to have any kind of tax reform, it comes out of the House as the proposal. The House can has the right to impeach the president. Impeachment is when you kick the president out. There are 3 stages of impeachment. I guess there are 2 stages. The first stage is to be impeached. When you have been impeached, that means you are accused of a crime. All right? Does not mean you are convicted of it. So you're just accused of it. Bill Clinton was impeached when he was accused of committing a crime. When we go over to the Senate, they will try impeachment. So once you are impeached, it goes to the Senate, where the Senate then determines if you are guilty or not. Bill Clinton was found not guilty of impeachment, and thus he maintained his job. We have never had a president that has been convicted of impeachment. The closest we had would have been whom? Nixon. And what did Nixon do? Why was Nixon not convicted of impeachment?
Because he resigned.
He resigned. That's the only reason why. He would have been convicted, but he resigned. All right, so we've never had one that has had that. We will talk about what that looks like, the impeachment process later. Okay, Senate. The Senate approves presidential appointments. So as we watched over the last year, as Donald Trump nominated different people for cabinet positions, it was the Senate that was responsible for giving the yes or no vote for them. They did not say, they said no to nobody. Everybody got approved. All right. This is where you would have seen Al Franken made a pretty big name for himself doing this. All right. They ratify treaties with foreign governments. The president makes a treaty, the Senate must ratify the treaty. So the Senate must say yes or no to it. These are both examples of checks and balances. The president says, I want to make a treaty with somebody. The Senate must say yes or no to it. Okay? Both of them together. They both can propose laws. So any law can come out of it except for the tax laws. They both can declare war. We have not declared war on another country since Korea. Everything we've done since then has been either operations or missions or something of that sort, and they don't need congressional approval then. That's a power the president will talk about. They can override a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote. Talk about that more in a second, but if the president vetoes a bill, it goes back to the Senate or the Congress and they can veto it. And they can propose amendments to the Constitution with a 2/3 vote. So one of the reasons you hear about constitutional amendments all the time, it's almost impossible to amend the Constitution unless it's something really, really agreed upon, because think about the ability for 2/3 of our Congress to agree on anything. It's like hard to fathom if that would be possible. So that is not an issue there. All right? Questions about that? Okay, so how to make a law. And this is found on page 9 in your packet. Okay? So the bill will start. A bill is what a law would be beforehand. Okay? It goes either in the House or the Senate. And we'll start ours in the House, just for argument's sake. You get a majority vote. Okay? So you get majority of people that vote for it. It would then go to the Senate, in which the Senate will debate it. There can be something called reconciliation where they will make some determinations. But if it passes there with a majority vote, it then goes to the president. The president now has one of two choices. Okay? The president can sign it. If he signs it, it is a law. So if the Congress was to pass tax reform, it would go to Trump. He would approve it. You now have a law. All right? The other option that he can do, he can veto it. Says no. If he vetoes it, it goes back to Congress. And if it goes back to Congress, they can override it with a 2/3 vote. Right? So this is where 2/3 of the Congress would have to say yes. Or, if he vetoes it, more likely, it dies. So what we saw with Obama, for example, is that the Congress during Obama's last term kept passing laws that would get rid of health care, for example. It would go to Obama. Obama would veto it, and that's it. It's dead. So again, these are all checks and balances that we have here. That the president just can't pass any law he wants, and that the Congress can't just pass any law it wants either. Question about that?
Wait, if the Congress overrides it with a 2/3 vote, does it just become a law?
It's a law. Yep. It is a law. Okay. Couple other things. If we go to page 10 in your packet, okay? There are the enumerated powers and there are the implied powers. The enumerated powers literally just list off what they can do. Borrow money, regulate commerce, they can tax, things like that. The Commerce Clause that says you can do business across state lines. All right? So these are all very clearly stated. There is also, though, the enumerated law. And this are implied powers, pardon me. And this is known as the Elastic Clause. And what this allows for is this allows for the Congress to pass things that are implied, so that are not simply listed there. So for example, they can pass the FCC. Yeah. Correct, they come from the Elastic Clause. So for example, what's on TV? If you guys remember now with Justin Timberlake doing the Super Bowl, you remember, was it 13 years ago when they had the wardrobe malfunction and he tore off Janet Jackson's shirt, right, and exposed her breast, and the government was able to fine CBS and other people for indecent exposure, they can pass laws like that because it's implied they have that power. If somebody disagrees with them having that power, what you can then do is you can then go to the judiciary branch and they will determine, the judiciary branch, if it is legal or not, if it is constitutional. But until somebody does that, you have the ability to have these sorts of things, all right? Habeas corpus, which we just talked about in class recently.
Right, what can the enumerated powers do?
The enumerated powers, if you look at it on the in the Constitution, there are 18 things that are just listed that they can do. So enumerated basically means there's a list. So they range from they can tax, they can declare war, they can borrow money, do all that kind of stuff. All right? Habeas corpus ensures a speedy trial. A speedy trial, a fair trial. They can't arrest you and then hold you in jail for 5 years without putting you in trial. One of the issues where we see this come up, if we look at things like Guantanamo, when you arrest people that are accused of terrorist activities and they've kept them there for like 10 years at a time, people will say that they are not being given a fair trial and a speedy trial. The other argument behind that, or the opposite argument, would be that they do not deserve it because they're not American citizens. So there are ways that you can use that. President, or let's say Congress, must approve the presidential budget. So if the president wants to spend something, the Congress must approve it. So we go back to that declaring of war.
Is this still part of this one?
No, this will be. So as we said, the president now can send people off to war without the Congress declaring war, but Congress must approve of the president spending that money. So this is this interesting game of chicken. We saw this with Bush during the Iraq War, is that Bush sends troops off to war without Congress's approval. Congress says, we don't want to be in this war. Bush then, and Congress says, if you do this, we won't approve of your spending. Bush then says, if you don't approve of the spending, then you're un-American, you're not supporting our military. It's politics. So then they go back and forth, and they come up with an agreement, and they figure out what to do. But Congress must approve the presidential budget. Finally, states are limited to what they can do. All right? And we'll talk about this more when we get to the Bill of Rights. But the idea is that a state cannot have a foreign policy of its own. So Minnesota could not have an agreement with Canada that just is Minnesota. We could not have our own currency. We could not have the Minnesota dollar. And we could not tax imports from other countries. So if we wanted to tax fish coming in from Canada, we could not do that. As a nation, we would have to do that. Questions? Okay, so tomorrow, what we will do